Sometimes the experiences that we have in life can be kind of difficult to let go of. But as you let go of baggage that you have a new challenge now that faces you, is that now you have a void. And that can be difficult to deal with, because as the void sets, now you realize that a lot of the struggles that we have as people is actually with that exact thing. The ability to embrace the void that is part of life, the idea that maybe it's all meaningless and blah 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 blah, all these different ideas actually comes from how do you go about, embracing that part of life. And you can do it in two ways. It can be through courage and love and all these things which are positive, or you can do it out of fear. And in one of them, which is love, you get to have a life. You get to live a life of, you don't live in fear. You live in abundance. You live in embracing. You live in a life which is yours, where you're in control. But when you go and approach these things from a point of view which is like out of fear, and you don't know how to deal with it, and you're like, oh my god, like if they leave me, for example, I'm gonna be alone, I'm gonna have nobody. We're like, what if I have nobody? Blah blah blah. See, that that's the internal dialogue, for example. Well, as you find yourself dealing with this, now whose life is it now? Like, okay, well, we're gonna now are gonna be spending time being controlled by this voice, being controlled by this thing. And you realize that the same way that we find ourselves having to live based on this voice actually ends up, when it is pushed to an extreme, being a mental illness in a way. It's not a healthy way of living, which is to live pushed by our fears, our fear of being alone, our fear of being, not completed by all these other things that we try to seek from people. And because as you go and consume this type of content, you're going to find yourself progressing. And as you progress can be scary, because now you no longer have those patterns which you start to get familiar with, and you start to be like, okay, well, I start to get a sense of what life is about, what life is for me. And you start to think, well, maybe that's just who I am, and I'm a bipolar person, and a bipolar person needs to be treated like this. And now you start to impose these rules and stuff on people that really they don't even have to deal with that, because that's not even true. In actuality, those patterns, right, they weren't always there. You can try to convince yourself all you want that like they were, but in 99% of these cases, and I'm not a doctor or anything, but I can tell you that in 99% of the cases, number just brought out of my head right now, but out of all of these patterns you can change. And for most of us watching this, I know we understand this, and I know that it makes sense to you. So what I'm saying is that has to be recognized. You can't just live in a world where you say, well, I guess I'm just this and I'm just that, and that's why I can't deal the same as other people. And that's just not true. But whatever is it that is at the source of the behaviors you don't like about yourself, or the things that you don't like about yourself, if you go and just face that, for however long that it takes, it's like the quote says, right? It's Eric Thomas. It's the pain might last a minute, a second, a day, a week, a year, a month, but eventually it will subside, and something else will take its place, right? But if you don't, you'll be in pain forever, pretty much. And that's really true. And to give you an example of that, we could look at anybody that deals with pain. There's two ways that they can go about it, and one of the main ways is just to jump to a conclusion about other people, right? Let's say somebody's heartbroken. Well, the typical solution that people come up with to cope with that is to say, well, all women are like this, or they say all men are like this, and no, and really that just ends up being a coping mechanism for that situation, for that emotion that is hard to face. But if we were to just accept that it's not that experience doesn't mean that it should become a generalization of everybody. That you realize that as a coping mechanism, what that actually does is that it makes you live in pain by living in a world where that is true. Because now what you've done is you force yourself to live in a world where men are like this, women are like this, people are like this, friends are like this, relationships are like this. And now that's a painful life to live. To not even live in the reality where hope of what you actually want and desire out of life exists. It's kind of trying to create for you a hopeless life. And the reason why you're doing this is actually to save yourself out of the pain of being disappointed again by people or by whatever outcome you're trying to get. And that's kind of crazy. Because really, out of all these experiences that you've had of people, all the positive one, all the faith you could have into the world, and because of these experiences that were negative, the few, now you want to give up on people, right? Because in reality, when you do that, what you see into the world is going to is a reflection of you, right? And so by hurting the mirrors, you're hurting yourself, really, right? And so I'm just saying that's a miserable way to live. And that the way in which to live that has more honor, that is more worth living, is actually the one where you give yourself another try. You give yourself another chance to go to the world and see what it's about, right? And where I was going with all of this is just to say that as you face the source of pain, as you face those things that are responsible for basically the patterns that you don't like and the experiences you don't like out of life, you're gonna find yourself letting go of the baggage. And now what's gonna be the struggle is the void. And it's really important to know how to deal with the void, because otherwise you're going to fall back into the patterns that you're familiar with, because it's so easy to do so. And a good way to move on is to actually give yourself enough time to accept this void. Is to just allow it to be for a certain period of time where you're able to just be aware of look at what reality is without that struggle, without that behavior, without those painful things, right? Because as human, what we do sometimes is I've seen a video about this, we're willing to create pain in our life instead of actually just sitting into nothingness, to sitting into doing nothing, right? It was a guy sitting in a room, and they gave him a buzzer, and they told him it was going to electrocute him if he clicks on it, and all he had to do was sit there for a certain period of time. And after a while, he ended up clicking on it, even though he knew what was going to happen. He knew it was just going to create pain. And it goes to show the nature of us as human, is that it can be hard to do this. And it is really hard. And that's why we struggle with aloneness and being alone. That's why we struggle with just sitting and doing nothing. That's why we struggle with boredom. We struggle with, overconsumption and distraction ourselves and porn and all these things. Is because of how hard it is to actually sit and do nothing and accept just this. I think that's kind of fascinating. And basically, to give yourself enough time, to give ourselves enough time to sit and allow for life to be as it is now, without that, can allow you to rediscover life in a new way, to rediscover it in a new light, and to give yourself a new start, to be somebody different moving forward, and to be able to have different outcomes than the ones that you've been getting and that you were unhappy with. And I think that is a great message of hope. I think that's a great opportunity to do so. But to fall back can send you back into a loop which could last days, weeks, months, years. And I wouldn't suggest that, is what I'd say, because it's a waste of time, right? And it's not just about you, it's also about the people around you and how you could enhance their life just by taking care of yourself, just by being better as yourself. And I think that's a pretty big deal if you ask me. Right? It's not just about us. It's not just about us. It's also about the people. And just like me making this video is not necessarily about me, the same way that you taking care of your own mental health and your emotions and dealing with yourself isn't about you either. And I think that's something that we should, be mindful of. Anyways, as I close this video, pretty much, I just wanted to say that it's hard dealing with the void that like letting go of baggage does. And that's the point of this video. It's important to give ourselves time, because the absence of pain can be more difficult to deal with than the pain itself, because at least in pain you have something to think about, something that you get familiar with and start to understand that happens. But this is new, and new can be uncomfortable, and this is what I'd like for us to be aware of, so that we don't fall back into the patterns. Appreciate you for watching. If you want to be part of a community of people of understanding and that want to grow and think about these type of things, I'll leave a link in the bio for my school community. Thank you for watching, and leave comments if this was helpful, if you have any questions. Thank you.